most of Europe, if not all of Europe, have been underfunding their military capability for a long time.
Basically orchestrate pre-planned, martial law states across all global Western democracies.
The British Army have 73,000 people. The Ukrainians lost 120,000 soldiers.
It's Starmer. His performance is outstanding in terms of his ability to self-destruct.
Hello and welcome to The Protagonists here on The Pulse. We've got a fantastic show for you today, and we're going to be discussing something that's in the headlines at the moment here in the UK. Keir Starmer seems to be wanting us to go to war, or at least getting us ready to go to war. Who's the enemy? We're not too sure. Is there an enemy? If there is an enemy, is it the right enemy? We're going to be getting into all of that today here at The Protagonists on The Pulse. First of all, let me introduce our guests for this debate, for this conversation. We have Johnny McNeill, a former Sergeant Major in the British Army and now author. We have Greg Simons, Professor of Communication, and we have Warren Thornton, a journalist. So let's jump into this now. When Keir Starmer said he's going to increase defence spending in the UK, that made sense. Because let's be honest, most of Europe, if not all of Europe, have been underfunding their military capability for a long time. We've just left it to the Americans. If those idiots want to pay for our defence of Europe, let them. But those days are over now. So we've increased our spending. Well, a pledge to. But then last few days, Keir Starmer seems to have ratcheted it up a little bit. And he's used the word Russia. Now, I'm not too sure if Russia is a threat to Western Europe. Russia is definitely a threat to its neighbours. Most countries can be a threat to its neighbours, but is Russia a threat? So before we get into all that, let me go straight to Johnny, because Johnny is ex-British Army, so he'll know a lot more than me on this matter. The first question, Johnny, really is this island ready for a war? Do we have the capability to wage war to defend ourselves? Because over the last few decades, I'm being constantly told we have no capability.
And that's correct. Not a chance. We're not in the least bit ready for a major war. And something that is missing from a lot of the debates, I feel, in fact I know, because I've observed it, is the existence of Operation Yellowhammer. Now, I perceive that this entire construct was supposed to be militarized in 2017. We can come back to that. And that Brexit and Trump were not a coincidence. And because they failed to get that militarization plan initially, in 2018, this is when we should have really all have started waking up to this, is that the Tory government at the time inadvertently revealed it was a well-placed photographer in Whitehall who took a photo of a document in a civil servant's hand. And that document stated Operation Yellowhammer. Now, Operation Yellowhammer is the militarization plan for hard Brexit. It's still extant. In fact, it would draw more suspicion if they removed it from the UK Gov website now than anything, but it's still there. And I've been arguing, since 2017 on a number of kind of themes, but certainly on one, that if you were going to cut yourself off with your nearest trading partner, the EU, don't get me wrong, the EU are up to their eyeballs in all of what's going on at the moment as well. If you're going to cut yourself off trade-wise, then, and start introducing, 100% import, exports and tariffs as well, then you're going to cause complete and utter chaos, especially when it comes to food chains and obviously medicines getting through. The British military simply do not have the manpower to barely initiate a deployment, to police that and police the population at large, and certainly not to sustain one. because this has come after decades of options for change, which started after the first Gulf War, dwindling down the manpower and other resources, which I believe wholeheartedly, was a pretext in itself, so that when they did militarize, and this is what they're pursuing via Ukraine at the moment, so that when they did militarize, they would have the pretext, certainly 2017, to call on the Trump presidency for economic and military support in UK.
So, do you think Russia, for a short answer, do you think Russia is actually a threat to Western Europe? No. Let me jump in here with Greg. Greg, is this propaganda? Is this the government trying to get its own way? We've seen many dictators throughout the world. Every dictator creates an enemy, so the people will look external rather than look internal. Because if they look internal, it's the dictator they're always looking at. Is this just a modern version of that?
The giddy minds with a foreign venture. This is a standard, not only for the UK, but for other countries. They are in severe trouble. And I mean, you just look at Starmer. I mean, his performance is outstanding in terms of his ability to self-destruct and to create the image. I mean, he's got the nickname now, Chairman Starmer, not without reason. I mean, it's been a rapid decline. And if you look at it, there is not much depth if we look in the political system for alternatives, because it doesn't matter if it's Labour or if it's Conservatives. I mean, they are essentially the same thing, but with different wrappers, brands. So I think the people are feeling rather miffed at the moment, trapped, and looking for a way out. And I think this was one of the reasons for Brexit, but also now, I mean, this is many years afterwards, and there's still that situation. I mean, Starmer wasn't elected because he is the best candidate. He was elected because he wasn't the incumbent candidate. So, I mean, looking at this, it's just a circus which keeps on going around.
In your opinion, as someone who teaches communication, is this purely propaganda? I think that's the question I want to ask. Is this him clinging to straws and saying, if we can portray an enemy, I'm probably more safer in my seat here in the UK?
Definitely, but it's propaganda using a moral panic. So the public need to be scared of something. And for them to be scared, they must believe that something plausible, some plausible threat can happen, and that plausible threat can happen to them personally. And I mean, the Russians have provided this for a long time for different countries, and the UK is not exempt from this. I mean, if we look at the Great Game as another example of this, I mean, this Russian moral panic to scare the public, and that is the means of justifying and legitimizing a course of action which is hazardous and cannot be justified under normal circumstances.
Thank you. Let me jump to Warren. Warren, you're a journalist. I would describe you as an investigatory journalist. What's going on? What's out there that they don't want us to know and don't want us to see about this topic? Is there anything that you can think of?
Well, yeah, there's many things that we can think of here when it comes to this. One of the first ones we can do is get an answer for Keir Starmer, how 3 Ukrainian male models happen to know his addresses and where one of his cars is. Nobody in the parliament is asking that question. We have to ask, why not? The second thing is when they turn around and say we're going to get the UK on a war footing, we have roughly 73,000 troops that are ready, or should we say ready to go into battle. Please remember that in 8 months in the battle for Bakhmut, the British Army have 73,000 people. The Ukrainians lost 120,000 soldiers in that time. They know the topography, they know the language, they've been in the trenches quite often. We haven't for decades. We've never ever fought a drone war. Starmer is talking absolute nonsense. And of course, when he turns around and he says, we can get all our fleet together and we can get all this, we'll all be together by 2035. This will be over by 2035. The Russians at the moment are just 15 miles away from Sumy. Once they take that, and Sumy isn't the best defended place in the world, and of course, they're making advances all over the front line. We're talking literally 200 miles away from Kiev. Please remember this, that the Red Cross have had requests from Ukrainians, not from Russian propaganda, as everybody will spin it. They've had it from Ukrainians, 400,000 requests to know where the people that went onto the battlefield, where their fathers, the brothers, and everything else actually are.
Those numbers are upsetting. I mean, the people refer to it as a meat grinder, and it is a meat grinder. You know, it's like all major wars are meat grinders for at least one of the sides, and it's both the sides in this war, especially the Ukrainians. Now, I don't normally do this, but let me give Keir Starmer a little bit of not credit, but let me step into his shoes in a minute for a moment. He'll say, yes, we're not ready to fight an old war. We're not ready to put hundreds of thousands of men on the front line, because those wars we don't fight anymore now because we're technologically advanced. We've got drones, we've got these special weapons, we've got planes you can't even see in the sky. That's how we're getting ready for this war. It's going to be a modern war. Russia isn't as advanced as us. We're going to beat them, and we're not. It's not going to cost many lives. It might cost drones. It might cost some expensive equipment, but it's not going to cost that many lives. Johnny, are we at that stage? Is the British Army what I've just described there? Are we that technologically advanced? Are we looking at some sort of Star Wars weapon, or is it going to come down to boots on the ground?
It always comes down to boots on the ground. Eventually, you have to, whether that's in a domestic setting or whether that's on a foreign battlefield. It always comes down, because you have to occupy and hold that ground. It's physically, yeah, and I'm afraid what I see is a truly Orwellian construct. In that this rhetoric where they make out that we are the prospective victims of, an external attack, i.e. Russia or Iran or China, one of the other usual suspects. Well, then that scenario, I believe, also suits Putin, because playing the victim is like a shortcut. It's an illegitimate shortcut, but it's like a shortcut to moral authority. And so if you can steer your male population in particular to be fearful in preparation to join up or be press ganged, as we've seen in Ukraine, that will happen here. I've absolutely no doubt about that. It will happen here as well, should they ever get away with triggering this thing.
Everybody, stay with us. We need to go to a short break now here at The Protagonist on The Pulse. Back soon. Welcome back to The Protagonist here on The Pulse. Let me jump to Greg. Greg, any thoughts on what we've just been discussing there?
Walking, because, the political class seem to be absolutely oblivious to the military realities on the ground. That they live in this kind of fantasy world which they're portraying. Okay, so, as Johnny said, ultimately, you're going to need boots on the ground. Every conflict has that. And Russia, in its current form, is far more combat trained, far more combat ready, and its armed forces are as big as it's been since the 1980s. It's trained to fight NATO standards in terms of tactics and equipment. The West doesn't have this. It's an observer in it and a somewhat of a participant playing a very dangerous game, such as these attacks on the Russian nuclear deterrent, these bombers, which they're applauding and don't seem to understand actions can have consequences, pretty severe ones, because by law, an attack on Russia's nuclear strategic deterrence automatically paves the way for a nuclear response to that attack. And everyone's clapping like seals, like it's some kind of victory. And I think it's quite appropriate, but maybe not for the way which people imagine. They call it Russia's Pearl Harbor. But what was Pearl Harbor? Pearl Harbor was an attempt by a desperate Japan to knock the United States fleet, namely its aircraft carriers, out of the war to enable it to attack unopposed. It failed. It hit the battleships, the old things, and it lost an attritional war and a war which was determined in the factories. And you've had these bombers. Okay, they're old bombers. They're not of utility in this. This is a ground war. It's an attritional war. These have very little impact on it. So you're going into very dark and dangerous places, which I don't think they understand.
If I can butt in here, and just on that nuclear theme that you just raised, and that is the point. I believe what's intended to take place is to create at least a nuclear footing, an overarching kind of epoch event, but it has to be at least a nuclear footing to specifically take place via the Clyde Estuary at Faslane. This is I believe, is to result in a UK national emergency, which is then going to be made to chain react to the US across the EU and basically orchestrate pre-planned, martial law states across all global Western democracies.
Warren, do you want to jump in there?
I think they both make excellent points, both Johnny and Greg. So there's three things that we need to look at there. First of all, when it comes to this nonsense about having a go at the bombers, first of all, it wasn't the Pearl Harbor that Ukraine are claiming. They managed to knock out 5 or 6 of these, and quite well done. But there was a smart directive where you would leave your bombers out there. So when people say, why are they leaving the bombers out there? Well, the Americans do that as well. So we can check on each other and make sure we're not getting ready to launch nuclear weapons. Now, why everybody's applauding that is utterly stupid, because simple fact, what happens? Oh my God, they're attacking our airfields and our nuclear deterrent. What are we going to do? They're going to strike us next. Let's launch ours now. So if you get, a mad tin pot dictator, someone like a Zelensky in charge, suddenly you've got nuclear Armageddon. I don't see why anybody's applauding that. Next, the attack on the Kerch Bridge. They hit the buffer. The Kerch Bridge is open and working, not a problem at all. And Johnny made some excellent points about this war and where we're going to go with this. When you boil it all down, the Russians are rotating men in and out of this battlefield. They can get 30,000 troops where, as he says, Putin has got them fired up and ready. The whole of the West is against us. We need everybody to stand together. And of course, they can rotate those troops in and out. Now, you always know what the casualties are on the battlefield by the amount of bodies you repatriate, because when you are retreating, you don't have time to pick up your dead, and it's normally the other side who do it for you. Now, back in 2023, when they first launched their offensive, it was round about 4-1, then it became 8-1, then 12-1 Ukrainians were dying. At the moment, Ukrainians are dying at a rate of 26-1, and we're urging more and more of them to die.
Wow, they're horrendous figures. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but many large wars and both world wars were started by a series of mistakes, a series of miscalculations over several years, where each one of those calculations, based on the information just on that one issue, was the correct thing to do. But taken as a whole, over several years, led to those first 2 world wars. Has led to many major wars across the world. Is that what we're risking with this? I don't think Steinberg's got any intentions of declaring war on Russia. I think he's using it for propaganda purposes. But this is one mistake on a line of other mistakes that could lead somewhere extremely dangerous. Let's go back to Warren.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And as you guess, the other guests have pointed out already, this is a major problem because remember the First World War started with the Austro-Hungarians, and then suddenly the Austrians wanted to get stuck in, and then suddenly Russia were coming to the aid of Serbia, and then suddenly Germany were mobilizing, and everybody was snowballing. And before you knew how to stop it or put the cork back in the bottle, you weren't able to do it. Now, we've got the Americans who need to take a lot of the blame for this, because they're turning around and saying, oh, we're the mediators. No, you were the instigators. You removed the Ukrainian, literally the democratically elected Ukrainian government in 2014. The Russians came in 2022. Okay, they might have some of their own agenda for that. But we're looking at literally them trying to slide out of the back door on Ukraine here so they can go over and give Iran a pasting. And then after they've done that, in 2027, they're going to you literally depart to the South China Sea, because the Taiwan elections are at the end of 2027 and the beginning of 2028. And as soon as they elect a pro-Chinese government in Taiwan, America are going to kick off there. So they do need to take a lot of responsibility for this. And the two guests have spoke very, very eloquently, Nick, on how dangerous this is, and also about how we have this compunction to always see somebody as bad. We have orange man bad with Donald Trump now. We've got red man bad with Putin, and the next will be yellow man bad with Xi Jinping. This is the sort of racist lunacy dogma that we're getting from the West at the moment, and none of our leaders can hold a candle to some of the ones like Orban or the leaders over there. Are you going to go and fight for Starmer? Would you go and fight for Macron, having seen what's happened to him? Would you fight for Merz? Now, Germany have had 1 million reservists in the last 10 years quit. Nobody will go and fight for these world leaders. You have to press gang them. Are we really going to allow that? And when the bodies start coming back, we're not going to put anybody on the front line, because when the bodies come back, you'll be out of office quicker than you can say Ukrainian rent boy.
Oh, absolutely. Johnny, you served in Iraq. We made huge mistakes in Iraq. We thought if we could remove the bad brown man, we'll be welcomed as heroes, we'll be celebrated. Iraq will turn into a Middle Eastern democracy. They'll be our friend. And it all turned to crap extremely quickly. And that just shows how miscalculations and a misunderstanding of people and their culture and their history. Are we making this about? I'm sure you're going to say, yeah, are we making the same mistakes now with Russia?
I don't believe they're mistakes. Right. I believe they're deliberate. The consequences of every act are included within the act itself. Orwell, 1984. Certainly 91, after the Iraq 91, there was, obviously Western corporate. I now accept, I don't accept it, but I acknowledge it, that when I went to Iraq, I was there for corporate oil. And now it's obviously corporate oil is embedded, Western corporate oil is embedded in Iraq. I think that chaos that was created was entirely deliberate. They knew what they were setting out to do. And if I can just, and they tend to do exactly the same thing again, because then you provide yourself with a pretext to get militaries domestically, to get military on the ground. And if I could just diverge ever so slightly, in fact, probably quite majorly from Warren, I don't believe, and I think we have to stop taking politicians for their word, because the way I see things is I believe Farage and UKIP were British establishment projects all along. His role was to create the rhetoric, the far right-wing rhetoric, in order to allow the Tories to fill that vacuum that they created jointly with legislation, which has obviously been followed through by Starmer. But what I see, and where I've brought this point up with Warren, I think Trump equally has also been a Pied Piper, playing the same role, the same kind of anti-establishment underdog role, and he's just another puppet in this kind of global theatre that we're witnessing.
You just said something that really rings true with me, because for many years I've always thought those idiots start those wars, don't know what they're doing. But that's too simple of an explanation, because these people are not stupid people. They're well educated. They've got teams of people, advisors. They're not stupid. They're not me just making a decision off the cuff. So maybe the consequences to their actions are exactly what they wanted to take place in the first place. Maybe it looks like they wanted to destabilize the Middle East. They wanted some of the horrendous things that have happened across the globe. We might not be able to work out, or I can't work out, what their ultimate aim is, but that just means I've not got enough information, or I'm stupid. But it does seem to be a plan that we keep saying they're making the same mistakes, but maybe they're not. Let me jump to Greg. Any comments on that?
Stated, these are clearly thought out. I think it has something to do with what you'd call controlled chaos, that you create chaos enough in an environment, then your target is unable to defend itself, and it cannot exercise sovereignty. And I mean, this is definitely Iraq, if we look at that, Syria, Libya, these kind of countries. Although sometimes things can go a little bit awry. I mean, I suppose the one thing which they did not anticipate from, if we use the euphemism, full-scale unprovoked invasion of Iraq, what had happened as a result of that arrogance and ignorance, it brought Iraq and Iran closer together. They were able to bury the hatchet somewhat. And I absolutely agree with Johnny about Trump. This is something that I've been thinking about. I would characterize him as not being a reaction to a dying empire. I would call him a symptom of a dying empire. So he's left with a dilemma that any Nero or whoever, if we look historically, you have these dilemmas with a dying empire. The capability and capacity is rapidly shrinking, and so he needs to make a choice to save his empire. And he's done nothing different from the previous ones. I mean, Biden said to take back America's global lead position, and he says exactly the same thing. So as far as I'm concerned, he's doing the same kind of goal. He's just doing it with different means. And this is causing the chaos and so forth, because he's not following the strict protocols which have been used, which, to use the American expression, put lipstick on a pig to make it look a little bit nicer and prettier. But the effects are the same. I mean, his disastrous attempt to bring the world to pay for the rehabilitation of the American empire with the tariff wars failed spectacularly. And so, I mean, I think he's already created himself as a lame duck president just after a few months. Because where does he go from here? I mean, he's put himself into a massive hole. And I think this speaks to the quality, should we say, of the political leadership and those who advise them.
Yeah. Could I just jump? Greg have made perfect points there. I was only pointing out Trump was Orange Man bad because they need that narrative, and then they need Putin Orange Man bad. But when you look at what Trump has achieved or hasn't achieved, he promised he'd stop the war in 24 hours. That was never going to happen. Until you get rid of Zelensky and his regime, there is going to be no peace, because the moment you have a ceasefire, they're going to go in there and attack the eastern, should we say, the Russian element in the eastern Donbass. So that's never going to happen. You were never going to have peace. We are looking as though America want to have a real good go at Iran. They want to have a go at China further down the line. So this notion of peace, we had the nonsense, of course, with the Epstein files, where that was all going to be out in the open, and we've had an absolute damn squid there. So when you look at what Trump has done at home, he's probably batting about 50%. But overseas, the American policy the foreign policy has not changed one iota. The Americans basically turn around and say peace through strength. That's basically, we'll bully you unless you've got a first-class army to fight us back.
Yeah, I think as a species, the human species is a species of war. That's the history of the human race. It's constant warfare, and it's warfare for resources, for dominance, expansionism. That's what we do, and we've always done it. Let me throw a potential new enemy into the mix here, because it's something that I've never discussed with anybody. It's always something that's been in the back of my mind, which is China. Russia, like I said, is not a threat to Western Europe. There may be a threat to the neighbours. Iran is a threat to its neighbours, but I don't think it's a threat to the Western world. Same with North Korea. But China, there's something about China that scares me. China's huge. China now is the second biggest economy in the world. China has a history of warfare. China had a century of humiliation with Western powers having bases there. China scares me as it gets bigger and bigger and stronger. Let me jump straight back to Warren. Am I fearful over nothing there?
There is a real willingness, and I know you and I probably have different viewpoints on this, but there's a real willingness on America's behalf to take on China. Can I say, first of all, I think that's a terrible, terrible idea. We saw what happened in Korea. We saw what happened in Vietnam. We've seen what happened in Afghanistan. We see what happened in Iraq. And, of course, every single one of those, eventually America leave. They pick up their toys, they leave the region, and it's an absolute disaster zone. The next thing that you have to say is they've just placed 18 of these defense missile systems where Philippines and China have been fighting over these shoals and the coast guard has been clashing. They've just placed 18 of these defense missile systems pointed at Taiwan. Now, I would say this, Nick, if China come into the Western Hemisphere and they start mucking about, that's absolutely fine. You have a right to be fearful and a right to be upset. If we are literally on Taiwan's doorstep, because we don't want to lose, obviously, the microchips that are there, 75% of the industry is there, then, of course, I don't think we have any reason to get annoyed. Now, don't get me wrong, China are capable of doing naughty things as well. But I was at the Chinese embassy a few months ago, and they're making these floating platforms where they can launch 70,000 drones at a time. If we really do want to go to war with China, let them have their sphere of influence, let Russia have theirs in Eastern Europe, and America can have theirs with South America. And if they agree, if all three powers could sit down and agree those spheres of influence and not sort of tread on each other's toes, we might have a little bit of peace. Because it's never the politicians who do the fighting and the dying, or the military-industrial complex. It is always the ordinary soldier or the ordinary civilian who ends up getting slaughtered in these conflicts. So how about, Nick, wouldn't it be great if we could not have a boogeyman for a while?
It would be, but unfortunately, humans always want more. We could give any empire as much as it wants, but next day they will go, what about that bit of land over there? Johnny, let me jump to you. Is China a threat for the future, or is it a threat now?
China's only a threat if we make it a threat. And otherwise, it's not a threat. Again, it comes back to even a big bad enemy at the door in order to galvanize, patriotically galvanize, through Machiavellian means, the population. But the way I see things is that war itself, and particularly world wars, part of the aim is, believe it or not, is the mass cull of male populations. I honestly believe that. And you pitch each other's, populations against one another to go and do the fighting and dying, whilst the same structures within each respective state continue unaffected. And of course, if you're mass murdering your male population, and what you're doing is you're mitigating against any revolution, domestic revolution. And so what you do is you remove that threat, you mitigate that threat. And in terms of, and I think this is important, in terms of historical precedents, world wars in particular, both of them have been preceded about a decade or so beforehand by mass deprivation of dignity through a lack of funds or a lack of means, certainly for men to be able to earn a living and to feel a sense of being able to matter. And I don't think it's a coincidence whatsoever that austerity came in 2008. And what I believe is actually happening with austerity, or the cost of living crisis, as it's been termed, which is just propaganda spin for a quite deliberate and orchestrated joint corporate and political, deprivation of dignity, mass deprivation of dignity, particularly for men. And what it's trying to do is re-engineer, I believe, the Versailles Treaty effects that took place in Germany, when Germany as a whole, as a country, was struggling to, support its own economy because everything was being taken out of it. Obviously, there was a lack of jobs for men. Men who had no purpose, they were made ripe for purpose, ripe for meaning. And of course, then you had the 1929 stock market crash in the US, which led to the Great Depression. So what you do is you manufacture this Great Depression, and then along comes a Führer-type figure. I believe in this case it's Trump, or was Trump, but they've lost so much momentum because, again, I believe this was to be militarized originally in 2017. And then what you do is you make those men, ripe for recruitment, and you do that through patriotism or the vengeance effect, because you'd have people, young men lining up, queuing up to go and sign on. And the one that people still haven't cottoned onto yet, and it's in Gaslight and Gilligan, it's in the book, not by name, because I was monitoring the narrative itself before it was given a name. But the Dark Triad Model for Fascism, which I did, page 88, the Istanbul Convention, the UN's Istanbul Convention, that's their charter for their policy against kind of violence, or the prevention of violence against women and girls, right? That was then followed by propaganda arm, if you like, Me Too. The whole point of austerity, of patriotism, and the mass demonization, mass emasculation and dehumanization of men in particular, is to essentially make those men subservient to societal and state subservience. And then once you can do that, because it's the men that hold the key to the streets, right? Goebbels said that, right? Every dictator, even today with all the technology we have, again, it comes back to boots on the ground. You need to own the streets, and the men are key to that. So what you do is you come up with patriotic rhetoric, like Russia are going to attack, etc. And then you essentially steer that sentiment towards that patriotism, and you've got these push and pull, nudge narratives working in combination. They're not a coincidence. They're working in combination to basically force, to compel, to guilt shame eventually men into military uniform, should they ever get that mobilization trigger.
Very interesting points made there. Stay with us, gents. We need to jump to a break here at the Protagonist here on The Pulse. See you when we get back. Welcome back to the Protagonist here on The Pulse. Johnny was just saying then that the government seems to be implementing an old solution to an old problem, which is basically we have men in society who have become disenfranchised, who have become poorer, who are lost, directionless. Society isn't working for them anymore. Ideologies are being spread, revolution, the smell of violence in the air. So the natural response of governments and leaders is to say, we need to go to war to cull the men. Otherwise, this country will be ungovernable and we don't know where we're going to end up. And as a leader, I'll probably end up with a piano string around my neck on a lamppost, and I don't want that. Greg, let me jump to you. Does any of that ring true to you?
Well, I mean, historically, it rings absolutely true, time and time again. War is the last refuge of any political scoundrel. It's not the the welfare of the country or the people that they theoretically represent. It's their own interest, their own ego, the people that they are representing, the interests they are representing, which take permanence over anything to do with the people who theoretically voted for these people.
Warren?
Yeah, and they're absolutely right. When you sort of look at everything when it comes to, when you look at the moment, the uncontrolled illegal immigration, that is pretty much a population replacement. You're looking, these people can't be made to go to war because of the ECHR. You can't jab them, can't make them go to war. So what you've got is, let's start a war, let's get rid of them there. You had the COVID scandal, of course, which has finished off so many lives. And bit by bit, we are starting to make sure that men cannot literally breed. You've got the huge, shall we say, idiotic and rather crazy LGBTQ nonsense going on in school. So they're going after the children to indoctrinate the males there. Of course, so you've got the new feminist movement, we don't need a man and anything else. So, of course, birth rates are dropping. You've got Planned Parenthood. I mean, you've got all these things. This isn't by accident. This is an absolute, shall we say, war on the men in society, right from the word go. And if anybody thinks this is happening by accident, it just all happens to be coming at once, they're sadly mistaken, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's even worse than that. I mean, sperm levels are dropping all over Western men in the world. You know, it's less than half than it was 20, 30 years ago. Half. I mean, that is a danger in itself. Where men are being poisoned, you know, the use of the female pill is in our water supply. We're drinking it every day because it's not filtered out. We're looking at the chemicals in food containers. These things are all damaging the male reproduction ability. And then we look at young men now. Young men can't even meet women, can't get married, can't afford a house, can't afford to have children. It's a dire time. But if the government can come along and say to men, yes, you failed at being a provider and a protector in your community, but you can be a protector of the nation. And you may die. You may die, but you will go down in history as a hero, as Captain America, as Churchill. That's quite tempting to a lot of men. Johnny?
Spot on. So when you see the procession of coffins and Union flags coming off the Herc or the A14s or whatever off at Bryce Norton, that in itself is a recruitment tool. What we've witnessed, I believe, is the weaponization of the poppy as well, to shift from what was once a somber commemoration into a celebration of militarism, on an annual basis. The LGBT aspect, quite deliberate as well. I mean, that's to divide the female demographic and obviously agitate them as well. But actually pushing this forced diversity, and particularly the LGBT one, onto the forces and the police in particular. Well, then what that does, that has the effect of steering mass common sense sentiment towards the far right. Because the far right, in this Orwellian reality that I see, they then act as the men's champions and the family champions. But it's orchestrated.
Yeah, I mean, there are no such things as coincidences. I mean, this is clear. I mean, you've got a pattern which has been established. But, I mean, there are too many people out there who are scraping by to subsist in modern society. They don't have the luxury of time or ability to join the dots. And, of course, the mainstream media are doing everything to ensure they do not join the dots. There are lots of little distractions. So, yeah, I mean, this is a war not only on the population, but I think it's also a war on what has been Western civilization for some time now. And I think it's got to the point where, I mean, the tipping point has been reached. I mean, how do you go back from here? I mean, mentioned the replacement of people, native people with migrants. I mean, Sweden's the same thing. They brought in hundreds of thousands of undocumented, unknown refugees, made them dependent on the Swedish state, did not integrate them. And this is the voting pool of people that will vote for them because the mainstream governments give them their the bread through different welfare. And I mean, if we look at the voting patterns of France, I mean, Macron, I mean, you look at it, and he's been winning not because he's been voted for by the French. They've been voting against him. What have been voting for him is the same thing. You got this mass pool of migrants who are dependent on the French state, and they understand that if other political powers get in there, they will lose their welfare and this lifestyle. So you've got this particular aspect as well. So, I mean, things are grim and gloomy, but unfortunately, I think a lot of the gloominess and the danger are not apparent to the full extent and to many people.
We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. Let me put this question to all three. You've probably about 90 seconds each to comment on it. We live under the illusion that we live in democratic countries and our leaders are public servants. But if we pull the curtain back, the reality is those leaders rule over us. That's how I feel our nations are run now. We have rulers. We don't have public servants anymore. Warren.
Yeah, very, very simply, I'll sum it up in 10 seconds or one sentence for you. You live in a democracy until you disagree with it, and then it's a dictatorship.
Yeah, spot on. We've got people in British jails at the moment who would nod along to that sentiment as well. We go to jail in this country now for tweeting, not for violence, not even for threatening violence, just for tweeting. You can go to jail in the UK. Johnny?
The fact that the immigration aspect is happening across the global West again is not an accident. I believe each respective intelligence services are actually bringing these young men of fighting age in deliberately to agitate the population and, in principle, to agitate, the white working class male. I think there is a silver lining because I see it as a failing construct. And, in terms of pulling the curtain back, when the Nazis rolled out the Volksempfänger, the People's Receiver in 1933, the same cartel, I mean, the history that we've been taught is a lie. The same, cartel continued with that. And I believe that the advent of TV, black and white and in color, the whole process continued. And so what we have, people call it a matrix, but that's become cliched because people don't truly understand, what, a matrix is. But it's a Volksempfänger reality, in essence, that we've all been enveloped in and absorbed by. And I think it's been with us all the time. But certainly since the Reagan-Thatcher era, I think the global West, I think they had it all but sealed during the Reagan-Thatcher era. And we've been in this perfect dictatorship ever since. But it's failing. The good news is it's failing.
Oh, it's absolutely failing. We can see it across the Western world. We can see it everywhere. I can smell it in the air. That is all beginning to crumble down. And I think a big part of that is social media. They can't control what we talk about and who we communicate with. Greg?
Okay, to just finalise some cheerful points.
Yes, please. Some good news would be good.
Well, I think, unfortunately, if we look at it, I mean, a lot of these so-called national leaders have no national loyalty or adherence to national interest because they're globalists. And so, therefore, they have this ideological adherence to things which are usually against national interest and so forth. And what we have is that this so-called liberal democracy has evolved in such a way that it's the pursuit of this dystopian construction of liberalism at the expense of democracy. And what we see are these absolutely unelected, rent-seeking Eurocrats which are taking over power, such as von der Leyen and Kallas saying how she was victimized during the Soviet occupation, but fails to mention that her family were very high up and benefiting very nicely from the Soviet occupation. And I mean, if we look at von der Leyen, I mean, they try to call these people elected. They're nominated by the supreme political class that is destroying Western civilization. And I would always love to ask von der Leyen, what did your daddy do in the war? Because I
Greg,
think
Greg, we'll ask that question on another episode of The Protagonists. Gentlemen, thank you for coming along today. I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. I hope our audience did. And don't forget, tune in again next week for the next episode of The Protagonists here at The Pass.